Matt Eberflus had another really rough outing on Sunday. Is it a foregone conclusion that he is out after the season? We'll debate next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us the #1 sports podcast network. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this football season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. He is Landon McCool. And on today's episode, we're talking about the offensive line changes, including Tyler Smith, the left tackle, our thoughts on that position long-term. We're also going to talk about the defensive tackle room that quietly continues to improve for the Cowboys. But I want to start with Matt Eberflus. We heard some comments from Jerry Jones on Monday about Matt Eberflus. We saw another outing where they gave up 34 points, did not force the Chargers to even kick a field goal or punt in the first half on Sunday. Is it a foregone conclusion, Landon, that Eberflus is gone here in 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it is at this point, right? And only if you kind of base it on the sort of posture and body language in the sense of what they're saying from the decision makers like the head coach and Jerry Jones. It feels like, I don't know, short of them being fired, that you would have your owner or general manager come out and say, yeah, like, this guy's gone before the end of the season, or, that sort of thing. So, like, any kind of hinting or anything less than full-throated support for your defensive coordinator at this time of year after the kind of performances that you've seen feels like very heavy kind of hinting that this is potentially a situation that's going to be changed at the end of the year. And look, I mean, he's earned that right at this point. Right. Like it does feel like the Cowboys defenses continue to get worse and not improve. I heard some folks kind of looking at the numbers from the game and seeing the uptick in man coverage and maybe some more blitzes and some folks trying to say, well, look here, I mean, this is what you guys have been asking for. Maybe this proves something that Eberflus is correct here, that they shouldn't be running so much of this. And to that, I just say, I think that the fact that the Cowboys did more blitzing or had more man coverage and still had the kind of success really is an indictment on this coach's inability to properly install a number of blitzes or properly coach how to play those blitzes in order to get production. And I think that's played out, is that they don't blitz enough. They don't have very much of it in their playbook. They didn't install very much of it in training camp. So when they need to use it, they aren't very good at it. They don't have a ton of variety.
Well, and the other thing is, if you've watched the Chargers at all over the last 2 months, they have the worst offensive line in the NFL. The way to beat them is by just rushing 4 and dropping guys into coverage because their offensive line is so bad, right? So what do the Cowboys do? They uptick their blitzes this week, and the Chargers are able to kind of max protect and hit guys wide open down the field. It's a mess. They don't have the personnel to run what Eberflus wants to run. He's not helping the guys that are currently on the defense. He's not adjusting his scheme. It's just a bad fit. My only fear is that Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones are going to look at it and say, hey, we can't have our 4th defensive coordinator in 4 years. We need some continuity. But outside of that, I don't see any reason why Eberflus should be back in 2026. Like he's giving us nothing this year to suggest that things are going to get better.
Well, I do think that the thing that is going to be better for this situation is that it does feel like there's going to be better candidates coming out this year. I mean, despite what we kind of thought, like, there's a chance that Todd Bowles will be available. Several other coaching staffs that are getting fired have quality defensive coordinators that maybe let go as well, that you're going to have available. Jim Schwartz is a name that's been thrown around there. I've seen a lot of couple of different guys that are, Jonathan Gannon over at Arizona. I was a guy that I would certainly be interested in as well. So I do think that maybe that like entices Jerry a little bit more than where you were at the point you were making a defensive coordinator hire last year, because you were, going through the transition of doing both theoretically, though, the timing of that is a little bit wonky.
Yeah.
I will say, though, that I think if they kind of are making that decision early, at least in their minds, and even though they may be letting the defense coordinator play out, I think that still fits in the timeline of being able to kind of pounce on a top end defense coordinator when they become available. Certainly more so than, maybe where they were at this point last year, where they were still trying to figure out their head coaching situation.
So let's say the Cowboys move on from Matt Eberflus. And this was a question I asked our guy Stretch today. What makes this an attractive destination for defensive coordinator candidates? Because you look at the roster on that side of the ball, you might need at least one starting linebacker. You might need 2 starting corners. You might need 2 starting safeties. And oh, by the way, your entire defensive end room outside of Donovan Ezeraku probably needs replaced. So is this going to be a spot where, let's say Jonathan Gannon gets fired or Brian Flores is let out of his contract? Is this going to be a spot that these guys want to flock to?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think ultimately the Cowboys still have a draw. Look, I understand that it's not the same, but I mean, you're going to get paid well. You're going to get a lot of exposure here. And I think that the Cowboys are going to spend resources on defense, right? You're right that the cupboard looks kind of bare, though you do have a nice young edge piece. You do have some pieces on your defensive tier. So it's not like your defensive line is so far away. And I think that there's clearly if you just look at it from the outside, I think there's clearly going to be a commitment by this front office to make this defense better, because the offense is kind of where it needs to be. And a lot of those pieces are sort of locked in. George Pickens situation kind of, notwithstanding. I do think that the Cowboys have 2 first-round picks. They're going to spend some money on the defensive side of the ball in order to get it to where they need to be. And I also think it's if you're one of these coordinators that are potentially the Cowboys are looking at, likely a former head coach, especially, maybe you're looking more long-term, right? And I think that that's what the Cowboys are looking for. They're looking for a situation after having gone through several defensive coordinators to make a commitment to someone that they think is a high-quality defensive coordinator, so they don't have to kind of constantly cycle in and out of these guys.
Is that George Pickens the one that punched a fan on Sunday? Oh, wait, no.
That wasn't.
Yeah, we didn't hardly hear anything about that.
Terry Bradshaw didn't ever get back to me on my phone calls, because I was calling him just because I know he was so concerned about the situation.
That's wow. Last thing on the defensive coordinator, and I promise you guys, if and when the Cowboys move on from Matt Eberflus, we will do a deep dive into some of the available candidates, ones that would make sense for the Cowboys. But do you think that the Cowboys are going to pigeonhole themselves into one or two things where, an experienced guy, because they are kind of in a championship window in 2026 and 2027? And number two, do you think they're going to maybe look for guys that fit their current roster? Maybe, more of a 4-3 up the field. What do you think?
Well, I think the latter part of the situation I'll answer by saying I don't know that there is anything on the roster that you need to fit to at this point. I think
Bland can play just about anything, right?
Yeah, Bland is, I think, more coverage agnostic than Diggs was. Mm-hmm. I think that Ezeraku could play standing up or with his hand down in the dirt. And then your defensive tackles, you can play in either one of those kind of situations. I do think that I would try to avoid a more two-gapping scheme, which I think that they probably would anyways. But outside of that, I would like to see them try to get somebody that's a one-gap scheme. Doesn't need to be necessarily a 4-3. It could be a 3-4 if you want to do that route. I think that doesn't matter as much. But I think I would like to see somebody that is well versed in sim pressures, well versed in modern defense, and is not afraid to blitz, because I do wonder, just in case the Cowboys don't turn over the roster the way they need to, you need to have somebody that has the tools in their tool belt to kind of generate defense, or at least funnel the offense into the areas where you do have talent on your defense.
Well, I mean, it's also if you're going to get somebody that has a really high blitz rate, let's say it's a Brian Flores or a Wink Martindale, whoever. I'm making up names right now, right?
Yeah.
You're going to probably prioritize coverage guys, guys that can play man to man. If you're going to be playing, a lot more cover two, you're going to have to prioritize the defensive line and go out and get some guys that can get after the quarterback. So some big decisions the Cowboys front office is going to have to make this offseason. But hopefully it's more Brian Schottenheimer making those decisions than anybody else. But we'll see. I want to talk about the Cowboys offensive line because we heard some very interesting comments from Brian Schottenheimer about Tyler Smith's future. I want to dive into the film a little bit more next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. And that's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. And live betting is the best when the game starts to shift, a receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. And FanDuel lets you jump into the moment with live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly, player props that update as guys heat up, and you can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, and every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this football season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. You guys should join the Everydayer Club. You're going to get all access to Landon and I one-on-one text chats. You can get ad-free episodes. It makes listening to this podcast even more enjoyable than what it already is. Go to lockedoncowboys.supercast.com to learn more. Landon, let's talk about the Cowboys offensive line. And I want to start with Tyler Smith because you watched all of his snaps today. Played 57 snaps at left tackle in this game, replacing Tyler Guyton, who's been out with a high ankle injury. How do you think he played?
I think he played well. I mean, I think, there's no breaking ground or breaking news with Tyler Smith playing left tackle. I think his strengths and his weaknesses have remained mostly the same since he's been a young player. I think that he's super. The things that make him a good guard are the things that serve him at tackle. Right? He's very strong. He's got incredible grip strength. Once he gets his hands on you, it's probably over. Right? But the things that are the reason that he plays inside are also still apparent when he plays tackle. Right? Like his footwork isn't super perfect clean. He makes up with it a lot with his grip strength and with his power. There's definitely times when it feels like you watch him and he's chasing guys, which usually comes from kind of a lack of assuredness on what he's doing footwork wise. He's not getting to his landmarks maybe as cleanly as he needs to, so he's striking with a little bit off balance, and then when he does that, you start to see the kind of things that he'd had at Tulsa, right, where he's striking with his hands too wide, right, and that means that can lead to holding penalties, which I think he actually had a holding penalty, if I'm not mistaken.
Although that one was, I don't want to say it was a bad holding call. I just think it was a little soft.
To me, the problem with that specific holding call was the timing of when the hold occurred. Like the ball was coming out already by the time the hold happened. So he did hold him, but
I can live with that one. That's not an egregious one. Like if you get called for it, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a bad example for my point in this, but I do think the point still stands is that you're seeing it where his hands are getting a little too wide because he's got a lot of room and he's trying to control guys on the outside of the shoulder pads, which is going to incur, some holding penalties. So I think he's a better than average NFL left tackle, which is really, really saying something considering he doesn't really practice it or do much there. I just think that ultimately at the end of the day, there's a ceiling there because of the way he plays the game and because of his technique and the way he overcomes it. He's just better inside at guard where there's less room for those kind of mistakes to rear their ugly head. There's less room for his to punch and get his hands wide. I just think he's a better guard, and that's why I don't hate him at tackle. I just think he's a better guard.
Concede all of those points. Like I don't think there's anybody arguing that he's not a better left guard than he is left tackle. I think the issue or the discussion that we can have is what's more valuable to a team, having a let's say a top 5 left guard. Now, he hasn't always played that way this year. I need to give him some benefit of the doubt, though. He's playing through a knee injury. I think he's starting to get healthier. I think for the most part, over the last 3 years, we would say top 5 left guard, or let's say the 12th ranked left tackle, and maybe even higher. Because one of the things I will say about Tyler Smith that we have not talked about is he really hasn't had a whole offseason to work at tackle, because when he got drafted, he was expected to be a guard, right? Had all that offseason to be a guard. He got thrown into left tackle late in camp. Then he's played guard the last couple of years. And I think if you were to tell him in an offseason, hey, you're going to be our left tackle, I think you would see a big jump in his play. But if he's the 8th or 9th left tackle in the league, is that better than being the 4th left guard? I don't know. I honestly don't know. And I think that's maybe some of the equation the Cowboys are going to have to figure out this offseason.
I think that's a whole conversation to have by itself, like the value of guard relative to tackle and where he lands on the spectrum on each one. I would say, though, that I think that it's kind of dulled a little bit by the fact that one of the things that Dak specifically likes is having a very solid front of pocket. And I think it's really, really difficult to kind of have that when you've got a weak link. And I like TJ Bass, and I think that he goes out there and he plays at a starter level, but I just don't know that he's the same sort of stout pass protector inside that you have with Tyler Smith. I think that at tackle, it's easier to give those guys a little bit of help. And I think 100%. that Dak even prefers to have the problems come from his outside, because he likes to step up to deliver the ball. I also think that you're creating a problem with Tyler Guyton, that Guyton's problem right now is he needs to stay healthy, right? And I think that you're creating another problem for having him switch back to right tackle, which I don't think is quite as easy to just flip the switch with this guy back and forth. And it's the question now becomes like, because I know what Schottenheimer said today too. The question now becomes like, is this a situation where you're trying to get the best performance for the Cowboys the rest of the year, and you don't necessarily want to rush Tyler Guyton back for injury? Or are you really considering doing a kind of double switch here? And that's kind of where I'm interested to see how this all plays out a little bit.
My guess is that the Cowboys don't have any concrete plans right now. I think they just feel like Thomas has been struggling and he's dealing with some kind of shoulder injury. This is a really good defensive line against the Chargers. We know that Bass can give you adequate play at left guard. Let's at least do this. And if Guyton's ready in week 18, we can rotate him in at right tackle or whatever, just to give us some different looks. I don't have any strong feelings either way. I think a lot of it honestly just depends on Guyton and like, can he stay healthy? And there is a point where, I mean, if we're going into year 3, he's been dealing with a lot of fluke injuries. But it's a lot to figure out who's playing left tackle every week and moving that spot in and out. And maybe you feel like, hey, let's just go with the more durable guys and we'll figure it out that way.
Yeah, because I mean, the thing is that, and I kind of want to push back on something real quick, is that I don't think that Tyler Smith would I think if you gave him an offseason to play left tackle, I think he would be better, but I don't think it would be that much better. I think
I agree. Like you're incrementally better.
Yeah, like I think that this is who he is a little bit. So my point being, like, I just don't understand the idea of like leaning into this strategy like as the long-term strategy right now, when it feels like you could just go back to this at any time. And I would rather like plan as you're going with Guyton as your left tackle. And if it doesn't work out, it clearly seemingly works whenever you want to just kind of throw Tyler Smith out there. It's just like it's a high floor, low ceiling sort of situation with him.
Yeah, this feels. I agree with you. I think this should be the break glass in case of emergency situation where, hey, Guyton's going to be out 4 weeks. Rather than putting Nate Thomas out there, let's use Tyler Smith. We know we can get adequate play at left tackle for a month, and we'll scheme around it. But I agree with you. I think your best 5 is figuring out a way to get Guyton at left tackle, keep Tyler Smith at left guard, and that way you have a real strength in the middle of your offensive line. We'll continue to talk about this all offseason long, because I'm sure it's going to be a big deal. But I also want to talk about the Cowboys defensive tackles, because very quietly, They have a top 10 defensive tackle on their team, and who's not named Quinnen Williams. We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Car Gurus. Car shopping should feel exciting and not confusing. And with Car Gurus, you get the confidence that you deserve. They cut through all of the noise so you can actually see the best deals on the cars that you want. Because when it comes to a big purchase, you deserve the best deal. And Car Gurus makes the whole process simple by giving you real information, real deal ratings, and more listings than anyone else, so you can shop the way that you want. Use Car Guru's deal ratings to compare cars quickly without having to guess whether the price is fair or not. You'll love being able to filter by everything, including mileage, trim, features, so you're only seeing the cars that actually fit what you need. And Car Gurus connects you with trusted dealerships for a transparent and hassle-free buying process. And with over 4 million listings, the most of any major automotive marketplace, you'll always find the best deal possible. So shop the way that you want with tools, data, and unbiased deal ratings that make the entire process easy. Buy or sell your next car at cargurus.com. That is cargurus.com, cargurus.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Landon, I want to talk about the defensive tackles because very quietly, Kenny Clark has played some really good football, and I thought he was really good in this game. Again, I know the offensive line for the Chargers is a mess, but this isn't a one-off thing. Like, he's been playing really good football for the last couple of months.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it feels like, he's been galvanized a lot by the Quinnen Williams trade, and not in like a negative feeling challenge sort of way, more just in a, like, he's just really truly taking advantage of the kind of gravity that Quinnen Williams pulls on the offensive line, and just taking advantage of the opportunities, right? And even in this game where Quinnen wasn't a part of the game, he had a really solid game, and like you said, like, it is kind of a ravaged offensive line, but still, he was out there. I mean, no one else was out there making plays, really. So yeah, I felt like he's played well. He's played very, very well these last few weeks, and I think it's, there was a conversation that was happening before the Quinnen Williams trade about, do the Cowboys want to deal with Kenny Clark long term, or should they figure out and just let him go and try to save some money? To me, it's like it's you have to find a way to keep him, because the defensive tackle situation in the NFL, it's difficult. Like, it's hard to find these guys, like, especially the guys that can rush the passer and play the run well. You have a couple of these guys now, and frankly, it's getting to the point, you and I were talking about this, that defensive tackle room overall is getting a little bit crowded, because you got a couple of different guys, especially now that Perry and Winfrey came in and gave you some pretty solid snaps. You've got a pretty crowded defensive tackle room in which that you could not find a defensive tackle that you wanted to put on the field on this team outside of Osa Odighizuwa before, August of this year.
Yeah, just run through a couple of the numbers really quickly. I had you pull them up before the show started. Since week 7, Kenny Clark is the 6th ranked defensive tackle in the NFL, 6 out of 59. Very impressive. Osa Odighizuwa is 12th out of 59. Quinnen Williams has missed some time, but if he had a little bit more snaps, he would actually be number 1 in the league. Mm-hmm. So that's 3 defensive tackles inside the top 12. Landon, and that doesn't even count who you've mentioned, like Solomon Thomas, who has been an above-average defensive tackle this year. Perry and Winfrey, who, again, very, very small sample size from this week, but he played well against the Chargers. Is this something that you just lean into in 2026 and figure out ways to get more of the defensive tackles onto the field? Or does somebody like Kenny Clark, who has no guaranteed money left on his deal, I'm not saying the Cowboys should want to trade him because he's been playing well, but is he somebody that, like, now is an asset that maybe you could trade him to improve your defensive end room?
Well, I think it's gonna, this is one of the things that actually may have an effect on who your future defensive coordinator is, and vice versa. That who your future defensive coordinator may have an effect on how this situation gets handled, right? Because I do think that, look, it's rare to have 3 of defensive tackles of this kind of ilk all on one team. Maybe you need to find a defensive coordinator who can kind of unleash that a little bit, help you play some more kind of 3-man fronts, some mint tight stuff that on passing downs. Now that's going to kind of change a little bit the structure of what that defensive line room is going to look like. But I think as long as they're continuing to attack upfield and allow these guys to kind of play, especially guys like Osa play a little bit more on the outside and maybe some 4-eye stuff, some 5 technique stuff. I do think that you're going to have a kind of unique situation. And if you look at like how Denver plays with their fronts, right? Like they use a lot of bigger bodies up front to kind of help stop the run. And then they use some of the Nick Benito sized, guys on the outside as their pass rushers. I mean, and that kind of fits what you've got in Ezraku. I think those body types are a little bit easier to procure as pass rushers. And if you look at what's available coming into the draft, it certainly fits those kind of body types, right? So I think there's some synergy here. If you can find the right kind of defense coordinator who can work with that sort of thing, lean into what you've got. You've already got to procure so much talent. Like you shouldn't give away talent at this point unless you're getting a lot in return, right? Like if you're trading Kenny Clark for 2 players or a player to pick, maybe you can convince me. But I think right now, don't give away talent if you've got it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just think of all the assets on defense, he's probably the most tradable because he's playing really well, which is a great thing for Dallas. I know there's people listening to this podcast right now thinking they need to go to a 3-4. Go to a 3-4. That's how you get those guys in the field. And I don't necessarily disagree, but it's got to be the right kind of 3-4. And honestly, 3-4 anymore is kind of gone out of, it's the way of the dodo bird, right? You don't see traditional 3-4s, but I don't think you want it to be like a Romeo Cornell or Dick LeBeau 3-4, where these guys are just trying to eat blocks. I actually think like a Wade Phillips defense where you get these guys like attacking gaps. That's how you could be really good.
Yeah. I don't want to change the way these guys are playing, right? I don't want them playing full on 2 technique where they're, setting the edge. They're lifting the guys, they're separating, they're peaking. Like I want these guys getting through gaps. I want these guys one gapping. I just think that you could change the structure. And look, it doesn't necessarily need to be a 3-4, just more guys that play multiple fronts, right? Like I think Dan Quinn is sort of kind of what you're talking about, where he was willing to put guys where they needed to be and make it work as long as the fits work, right? And I think that there's ways to do this where you can deploy these guys a lot and still kind of continue to have them getting upfield and be playmakers.
That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. If you need a last-minute holiday gift or someone keeps asking you what you want, make it easy. Ask for the Everydayer Club, ad-free episodes of the show, exclusive Discord server access, and more. And subscriptions can be gifted through the LockedOnCowboys.supercast.com link. And for those of you on video, we can send you the first ever 24/7 National NBA YouTube channel. And on audio, make sure that you check out the Locked On NFL podcast. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.